along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question. And, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question so we can debate and pass real campaign finance reform today.
Without objection, the gentleman's request is honored. Gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I urge my colleagues to vote for the previous question, rule, and underlying bill, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
Question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, on that I ask for a recorded vote.
The gentleman requests the ayes and nays.
Nays.
Those favoring a vote by the ayes and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen, the ayes and nays are ordered. Member will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time of any electronic vote on the question of adoption of the resolution if ordered.
This is the first vote of the day. Possibly there will be two in this series, and after this, they'll have general debate on the bill. Well, the Congressional Budget Office has released new budget estimates today, and they predict the government's deficit will hit almost $1.5 trillion this year, which is a new record. We'll go live now to CBO Director Doug Elmendorf discussing those numbers.
In our country, with deep recessions, in fact, the slow recovery is consistent with international experience following recessions caused by financial crises. But it's been a slow recovery by the standards of our past. The labor market, in particular, has been coming back slowly. Incomes have been coming back slowly. So it will take some time. It will take further recovery before we see the rebound in tax revenues that comes with an expanding economy. I think a second factor to note, and this is one important difference in our current projection for 2011 relative to the projection we had last August, is the legislation enacted in December that pushed off for another 2 years many of the scheduled increases in tax rates, and also in particular implemented a payroll tax cut that was not in place last year. And that also is providing some boost to the economy, as we say in the report, but means that less revenue is being collected than would have been collected otherwise. I think a third thing to emphasize is that there's an underlying dynamic affecting the government budget, which is that spending on the large entitlement programs, on Social Security and Medicare in particular, is moving up over time inexorably under current policies. And on top of that, we've had a number of entitlement programs that focus on people in economic trouble, unemployment insurance payments, what used to be known as food stamps and is now the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. They're laying out a lot of money right now because despite the slow improvement in the economy, many people remain out of work and many families remain short of income. So it's the combination, I think, of the slow recovery and legislation keeping tax revenues from growing very rapidly with spending growth that continues to be strong both because of the underlying dynamic and because of the particular economic conditions. Next question.
Damian Sletta with the Wall Street Journal. Can you tell us a little bit about the interest payments? Those are really expected to rise. What the impact of that is on the deficit and the debt?
Yeah, so we say in our report that interest payments in nominal dollar terms will more than triple over the coming decade, and even relative to gross domestic product will double. That is a consequence both of the increase in debt and of increases in interest rates that we project. Interest rates are very low right now by historical standards, and we don't expect that to persist throughout the decade. In fact, our forecast call is looking for rates to begin to rise at the very end of this year and into into the following years. And if one applies noticeably higher interest rates to a stock of debt as large as ours is and will be becoming even larger, the cost of servicing that debt becomes very large. I think that our projection for net interest payments over the coming decade is more than $5 trillion. That's correct?
Yes.
And that is one of the consequences, of course, of accumulating debt. We have written a number of pieces over the past year, well, years, of course, but a few last year that talked about some of the consequences of rising debt. One, of course, is I think the most traditional argument, at least to economists, that by directing savings into government borrowing rather than into productive capital, one is holding down the growth of productive capital and thus holding down future incomes relative to what would otherwise occur. A second consequence we've talked about is the more one has borrowed, the more one needs to pay in interest, and that crowds out other government activities or requires higher tax rates for any given path of debt that the country judges is sustainable and appropriate. A third problem we've talked about is that as debt rises, it reduces the flexibility that the government has to respond to unexpected problems, either domestic financial and economic problems, as we've just seen, or international security problems, as we are also living through. And the more debt that one has, the less room the government has to respond to that. The fourth consequence that we've talked about of rising debt, and this relates back to your question about interest payments, is the risk of a fiscal crisis, by which we mean a situation in which investors lose confidence in the government's ability to manage its budget, and thereby the government loses the ability to borrow at affordable interest rates. As we've said before and repeated in this report, there's no analytic basis we know for judging whether there is a tipping point or where it might be. But the risk does rise as debt rises, and we think will also rise to some extent as the investors' confidence in the global economy and global financial system rebound, and there is more willingness on the part of investors to invest in other assets and not just in U.S. Treasury securities. And the more we have to borrow, obviously the more important it is to be able to continue to borrow at reasonable interest rates. Yes?
I'm Eric Gannon with the Fiscal Times. The President last night proposed a 5-year spending freeze. The Republicans are proposing scaling back spending to 2008 levels, or $100 billion in cuts. In the greater scheme of things, even if these proposals were enacted, what kind of impact would it have on this larger debt problem that you're describing?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what the proposals are that are on the table. So to start with what the President has said, non-defense spending is a well-defined budget category. You find it in our report. Homeland security spending is actually not a well-defined budget category. The money that goes to Homeland Security goes through a number of pre-existing budget functions or budget categories. So if you actually look for Homeland Security, you won't find that specified in our tables, and different people can mean different things by it. But I will say, if you look at, we did an exercise of freezing non-defense discretionary spending. Apart from that, that goes through the Homeland Security Subcommittee, the Appropriations Committee. If one freezes that for 5 years, and then maintains, and then starts to grow again at the rates we use in the baseline, but from that lower level, so you have a lower level throughout the entire decade, the savings are about $400 billion over the decade. That is a large amount of money, no doubt, but it is also clearly less than 10% of the baseline budget deficits that we project for the coming decade, and only a few percent of the budget deficits that we project assuming the continued extension of those policies that I listed that have been extended in the past. I think, I want to say, though, I don't think there is a single policy change that will eliminate the fiscal imbalance. So I wouldn't want my comments to be interpreted as If you can't do it all, it's not worth doing anything, nor, of course, am I endorsing any particular proposal. But I think this is, as one can see in the work of the Fiscal Commission appointed by the President and in the work of other groups that have offered their own proposals, addressing a problem of this magnitude generally requires a number of different pieces of policy working together. Yeah.
Robbie with Gannett. To follow up on that, you looked at what the impact on the deficit would be. What about the impact on the economic recovery if those cuts were made now? Have you looked at that?
We've not studied that the economic effects specifically of any of these changes in appropriations that have been discussed. But I can offer a few observations. So one is that in the analysis we presented last January about reviewing a set of policies that were under consideration for spurring economic growth and employment growth, we looked at some changes in tax policy and some changes in spending policy. So, for example, we looked at the effects of increasing spending on infrastructure or increasing spending going to state and local governments. One can roughly, not precisely, but roughly reverse the signs of those effects to think about the consequences of reducing spending and of those sorts. And I say roughly because those estimates are sensitive to the underlying economic conditions. It's not an for all time sort of estimate. It's an estimate for the economic context, and we do somewhat different estimates today. But you can see some of the effect, I think, there. Beyond that, it's worth remembering we have a very large economy. GDP is about $15 trillion, and that makes it hard to move for good and for ill. So that is one of the reasons that despite the large increases in spending and reductions in taxes of the past few years, the economy has not leapt upward, even though we think it has been supported by those actions. It also means that cutbacks in spending may or may not have dramatic effects, depending on the size of those cutbacks. In this particular example that we were talking about, the calculation we did of freezing non-defense discretionary spending, except for this Homeland Security subcommittee, the savings are fairly small to start with and grow over time, right? Because we have a baseline which is growing at some rate, and we're sort of coming off that at a slower rate and then turning up. So the effect on the budget in 2012 is single-digit billions of dollars, that particular proposal. The effect in 2013 is about $15 billion. So the $400 billion, much of that number comes in the back half of the decade. So I think what is important, and was I think highlighted in my opening remarks about gradual implementation, it's important in judging the macroeconomic effects of policies that are being considered is partly the magnitude, partly the timing, and partly the specifics of what policies are being undertaken. So as you saw in our report from last January, not every dollar of higher spending or lower taxes or lower spending or higher taxes has the same sort of effect on the economy. It depends a lot in our judgment on the nature of the policies. Yes. Lori Montgomery from the Washington Post.
Sorry, Lori Montgomery from the Washington Post. Your new deficit projection for 2011 is about $500 billion bigger than you projected for this year in August. Is it fair to say, given that you're putting the cost this year of the tax bill at around $400 billion, that the tax bill is largely responsible for switching the trajectory back upwards?
Yes, that's right. One caveat I would note is that the numbers that we provide in here, the numbers that the staff of the Joint Committee on Taxation provide as revenue estimates, hold macroeconomic conditions fixed. In fact, in our baseline projections, we incorporate the economic effects of the various policies. So the effect of that tax change, as we report, was to provide support more economic growth in this year than we otherwise would have had. That has a little feedback effect on revenues, but not enough in that sense. It is still a very, as you're noting, very large share of the increase in the deficit is from the tax legislation.
$400 billion. I mean, is there like a number we can pin to the tax
There is a number you can consider.
Table 1-5 on page 18 shows changes from August and gives a split into legislative and economic and technical changes, so that should help you.
So for fiscal year 2011, the deficit we estimate to now be $414 billion larger, worse than we had in August. And you can see the breakdown of that. Excuse me?
Look at box 1-1 on page 9 has the actual effects of that particular piece of legislation.
So you can see there. So there's a minus 390, and that's on. And so in the box on on page 9, there's a minus $390 billion, which is the 2011 effect of that legislation. And that minus 390 is part of the legislative box on legislative part in table 1-5. I mean, you will see almost all of that legislative box. Yeah.
Wasson from the Hill. So are you saying you haven't done any analysis of this Republican proposal to bring this year's spending down to 2008 levels? Is there any number you can give on what that cut would look like? I mean, I guess you could do Homeland Security Subcommittee plus Defense.
Well, so again, there is this question about exactly what the policy is that's being proposed, and I don't know what proposal Chairman Ryan will introduce or that the House will adopt. We did look up a couple of numbers that we thought might interest you. And this is for the 2000. Let me start with a number for the 2008 regular appropriations acts. This excludes defense, homeland security, and military construction in the VA, which are categories that are often discussed in this context. A total 2008 appropriations were $378 billion in that category, for the total excluding those categories, again, in the regular non-emergency appropriations. The continuing resolution for 2011 on an annualized basis for the same category would be $461 billion, a difference of $82 billion. So if one proposed to go back to 2008 levels as defined in my table, that would be an $82 billion reduction relative to an annualized version of the continuing resolution.
And just to follow up on your opening remarks, you talk about Congress may want to do some of these policies gradually. Are you saying that cuts perhaps such as this could injure the economic recovery?
I think policymakers face a difficult trade-off. The longer that they wait to address the fiscal imbalance, the worse the consequences of the rising debt are. On the other hand, moving tax and spending policies very quickly can be disruptive to the overall economy and to the households and businesses and state and local governments whose individual situations would be affected by those changes. And that's a difficult trade-off, and how to balance those considerations is for policymakers to decide, not for analysts. We have found, as you know from, I hope, from reading our work in the past few years, our analysis is that reductions in taxes or increases in government spending provide short-term boosts to the economy, even though over time the extra debt that is incurred represents a drain on the economy. And you can see that in the testimony that we did for the Senate Budget Committee rather in September about the effects of different ways of extending the expiring tax provisions. You can see that in the analysis we've done of the Recovery Act. You can see that in the analysis we do of many other contexts. But the amount of effect of any given change in policy depends, as I said, on the magnitude of the change in vision, the timing, and the nature of the change. So we try not to make too many generalizations about the effects of different policies.
PBS, not the Business Report. Doug, can you say, is there much change in the outlook for Social Security from the last reports?
There is some change. I don't think it's particularly large. The payroll tax cut by itself reduces the flow of money into the trust fund, but that is offset in the legislation by money from direct revenue, from money from non-dedicated revenue sources. Then the revisions that we make to the economic assumptions and the technical assumptions do affect the flow of money into the Social Security trust funds. I believe the change this time was a little adverse to the trust funds. The most important thing happening, I think, in the decade, in a sense, in Social Security, is that we expect that the Disability Insurance Trust Fund will actually run out of money in 2017, I believe. Under the rules that we follow for constructing the baseline, we assume that those payments continue to be made to disability beneficiaries after that. But in fact, there's no legal authority for that to happen. The last time that the Disability Insurance Trust Fund was running out of money, money was moved over from the Old Age Survivors Insurance Trust Fund.
But that requires Congress to act, right?
Yes.
Yes. Jonathan Nicholson, BNA. Kind of 1.5 questions, if I may. One technical, one more overarching. The score on the tax cut UI bill was 374, I thought, last year. So it seems as though it seems to have picked up $16 billion in cost, according to the box. I'm just wondering what that was about. And then also, just kind of, we've had at least 2 stimulus packages in 2008 and 2009, and arguably a third one with the tax cut UI program. What, if anything, have you guys learned about what works or doesn't work in terms of stimulus from the experience of the last couple of years?
So on the technical question, I believe the answer is that the changes in the payroll tax withholding happened a little more quickly than the staff of the Joint Tax Committee had assumed in forming their estimate. So a little more of the revenue is lost in 2011 and a little less is lost in 2012. So that's, I think, a timing shift, not a more fundamental reassessment. It's a very good question, what we've learned from the experience of the past few years. And I think that the right answer is we haven't learned much yet. And I mean this in the following way. When you look at the path of an economy, it's very dangerous to attribute any particular movement to some single factor affecting the economy that one can identify, because there are a lot of factors affecting economies at the same time. And I think some of the best evidence about the effects of fiscal policy have come not from individual episodes looking at the aggregate data. They've come either from looking at data at the level of individual households in particular episodes. So, for example, careful analysis of how individual households that received tax changes at different times in the previous recession has informed the estimates that we've made of the effective tax changes today. But that was a very sort of granular look of the sort that often takes researchers some time to get to. There's been some work of that sort for some of the recent fiscal policy, but I think it's just not as fully developed as it will be at some time. And the other sort of research that's been important is research that looks at sets of business cycles in which one can try to control for the various other factors that affect the economy. For that sort of work, every extra recession is one more important set of data points, but won't in general overturn the results based on some large number of previous recessions. So we're watching very closely what happens, and there are people who have looked at the timing of the economic recovery.
Mr. Reyes. Mr. Reyes votes no.
On this question, the ayes are 234, the nays are 178, a majority voting in the affirmative. The resolution is agreed. This question is ordered. Question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Gentleman from New York, rise. House will be in order. House will be in order. House will be in order. Members, please cease conversations. Members in the aisles, please take seats. Members in the back of the room, please take your conversations off the floor.
We haven't done the rule yet.
In the rear of the chamber, please take your conversations off the floor.
Stand by.
House will be in order. Gentleman from New York.
Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman may inquire.
On the bill we're going to be considering shortly on the presidential checkoff bill, there's a requirement under the rules that the amendments be printed in the record. Is that record available?
Chair understands that the printed record is not yet available.
Further inquiry, does the Speaker have any guidance for the House on when that record might be available so we can read what we're going to be considering in a matter of minutes?
The Chair does not currently have that information. The question would become ripe when the amendment process begins.
Thank you, Speaker.
The gentleman from Florida, rise.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 359.
Without objection. House Resolution. Pursuant to House Resolution 54 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 359. The Chair appoints the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. LaTourette, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 359, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to reduce federal spending and the deficit by terminating taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions.
Gentleman's correct. The House will be in order. Members on both sides, clear the aisles, take seats, remove conversations. Members at the rear of the chamber. The clerk, did you report the title of the bill? Okay, excellent. Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. General debate shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means and the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on House Administration. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Roscom, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. McDermott, the gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Brady, will each control 15 minutes. The chair will again ask for order. Specifically, members on the chair's left will please remove their conversations from the floor. Proceed. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Roscom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Chairman, last night the President in this very chamber issued us an invitation. In that invitation, there were several opportunities, but two of them I'd like to highlight. One is, he said this. He said that he's willing to eliminate whatever we can honestly afford to do without. And I take the President at face value that he's interested in doing that.
The gentleman will suspend. Members of the majority side behind the rail, please adjourn to the cloakroom or the hallway so we can proceed with the debate. Gentleman from Illinois.
The other thing that the President issued was an invitation where he said this. He said, in fact, the best thing we can do on taxes for all Americans is to simplify the tax code. Well, the law governing presidential election campaign funds and the presidential primary matching payment account is located in the Internal Revenue Code, which really inherently makes no sense. And I think during the course of this debate, Mr. Chairman, we're going to lay out the argument as to why the President's first point can be greeted and agreed to, that first goal, that this is simply something that we can do without. But let me make a couple of quick points. And I think it's important to recognize the irony of the statement of administration policy that was published on January 25th. And I'm reading in the third paragraph, he says, the administration, in criticism of this effort, says its effect would be to expand the power of corporations and special interests in the nation's elections to force many candidates into an endless cycle of fundraising at the expense of engagement with voters on the issues. How can that be, Mr. Chairman? President Obama, when he was a candidate in 2000 for the United States presidency, declined to participate in this fund, both in his primary and in his general election. And if President Obama is able to rise above that, I think other Americans can rise above that. Also, I'd just like to bring your attention sort of that same argument, and that is, in a Dear Colleague that was sent criticizing this bill, said basically the same thing. By creating a viable alternative to private fundraising, the presidential campaign or the public financing system was designed to level the electoral playing field and ensure that candidates remain accountable to voters, not special interests. So does that mean implicitly, Mr. Chairman, that candidates who didn't participate in the program are somehow not accountable to voters? I think President Obama would say he's really accountable to voters. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington, Mr. McDermott.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Van Hollen.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague. I rise in strong opposition to this measure, which, along with the Supreme Court's radical decision in Citizens United, takes our nation's campaign finance system in precisely the wrong direction. Less transparency and less information for the voters. Americans from across the political spectrum, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, want less special interest money in politics, not more. They want clean, transparent, and competitive elections and campaigns where candidates, those of us in this room, presidential candidates, rise and fall based on the quality of their ideas, the strength of their arguments, and their ability to attract support from the voters that they seek to represent. What they don't want are campaigns decided by how much secret money flows into an election from secret outside groups. And they will no longer tolerate, I believe, those politicians turning around and saying to those citizens, you have no right to know who's paying for what in our political campaigns. You have no right to know who is paying for those TV advertisements that you're watching. Let's remember what we're talking about here. The current presidential financing system that this bill would eliminate arose from public outrage in the post-Watergate period. Rather than presidential candidates trafficking in secret slush funds, our nation decided that our democracy would be better served by a system of public disclosure, contribution limits, and emphasis on smaller dollar contributions matched by the Presidential Financing Fund. The system is voluntary, one line on your tax code, not complicated, and while not perfect, for most of its 36 years in existence, it has served this nation well. Candidates from across the political spectrum, from Ronald Reagan to Jesse Jackson have voluntarily participated in the presidential financing system. Now, as a colleague on the other side of the aisle mentioned, there is no doubt that the current law needs to be modernized. It needs to be fixed. We saw that in the last presidential election, but rather than throw out something that has served the country and the electorate well for 36 years, rather than throw it out, let's fix it. And Mr. Price from North Carolina and I and others have introduced legislation to do exactly that. So rather than shielding an avalanche of unlimited special interest money from public view, we should shine a light on it. We should do it by modernizing the presidential system, and we should also pass the Disclose Act, which we could have brought up and voted on, except for the previous question was just defeated. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, our nation's democracy doesn't belong to presidents or members of Congress. It belongs to the voters who send us here, and we have a solemn responsibility to safeguard it on their behalf and protect it for future generations from the lessons and corruption of history. Let's mend it. Let's fix it. Let's not throw it out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's time has expired. The committee will rise informally for the purposes of receiving a message. Will the gentleman from Nebraska kindly take the chair?
The House will be in order and the Chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has agreed with S-Conres 3, honoring the service and sacrifice of Staff Sergeant Salvatore Junta, a native of Hiawatha, Iowa, and the first living recipient of the Medal of Honor since the Vietnam War, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
The committee will resume its sitting.
The chair sees the gentleman from Illinois on his feet. Is it the intention of the House Administration Committee to let Ways and Means conclude their half an hour before you yield time, or are we going to go?
You want to just...
It'd be the chair's inclination to represent the gentleman from California at this moment in time if you're going to do it all at the same time. But gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If it hasn't been requested already, I would ask that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Well, it's already been requested in the House, and we can move on.
Mr. Chair, I rise today in support of H.R. 359, which terminates the taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions. At the outset, I just want to mention, in response to something that was said by the other side, this has absolutely nothing to do with the Citizens United case decided by the Supreme Court. That changed not one iota campaign finance law. Corporations still cannot make contributions to campaigns or candidates. It does not change that. Citizens United had to do with the question of whether or not one loses his or her First Amendment protections of free speech, particularly with respect to expressions of political nature, merely because they associate with another person. The Supreme Court told us that you do not, in fact, lose your First Amendment rights because you happen to say it jointly with someone else. As a matter of fact, they pointed out that some people with the least amount of influence in a society actually expand their influence in the political debate by joining with others. And then the question of the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court answered was that if that association happens to be corporate in nature, happens to be a union, happens to be a for-profit, happens to be a not-for-profit, whether that changes the dynamic as contemplated by the First Amendment protections, and they told us it did not. So let's get rid of that canard here on the floor right away. This has absolutely nothing to do with that. This has absolutely nothing to do with corporate contributions to campaigns or foreign contributions to campaigns, both of which remain illegal with criminal sanctions under the law. So let's get that out of the way to begin with so we don't have a lot of debate here that has nothing to do with the bill before us. Mr. Chairman, we find ourselves at a unique juncture in the long-standing debate over this issue, but frankly, in reality, it is a juncture no longer. Taxpayer financing of presidential elections and party conventions, the two major parties, is simply no longer defensible. The first tax liability contributions from American taxpayers to be diverted towards the funding of presidential elections began 35 years ago in 1976. This new practice was, as we were told by the other side, supposed to raise the public's trust in the government, as well as to increase both the number of candidates and thus electoral competition and the financial footing between parties. I believe, Mr. Chairman, it has failed on all accounts. It did allow us to have Lyndon LaRouche be a participant in the presidential elections. I'm not sure when we've had someone who had been subjected to a criminal conviction and actually conducted part of his campaign while still incarcerated. But that was brought to us by way of this fine law. In 1976, approximately $1.5 billion, since 1976, approximately $1.5 billion has been spent on this system. As we speak, there is a balance of $195 million sitting in the Presidential Election Campaign Fund at the U.S. Treasury Department. And yet, this system of electoral subsidization has not changed the public's perception of our presidential elections or our politics. According to one survey after another, Americans continue to harbor deep distrust of their elected officials. So does anyone think that our presidential elections over the past 35 years have shown a virtuous progression towards more accuracy and more honesty? Mr. Chairman, prominent presidential candidates who even supposedly believe in this system, have opted out of this taxpayer financing scheme in recent years. In 2004 and 2008, several candidates declined public financing for their primary campaigns. And as was mentioned by the gentleman from Illinois, during the most recent presidential election, for the first time, the nominee of one of our two major political parties withdrew from the public financing during the general election and instead went on to raise record amounts of money for his campaign. And I recall when I thought we heard a pledge to participate in this program because of the virtuous nature of the program. Somehow that was lost along the campaign trail. In addition to presidential primaries, and one of the things I would like to point out is this. There is this idea that somehow we are going to be able to suppress money that goes into politics. The fact of the matter is it's like a balloon, a water balloon. If you squeeze it on one side, it comes out on the other side. The question is, how do we get it within the system? We should be talking about the idea of this silly demarcation between our parties and our candidates, where we limit in extreme fashion the amount of money that can be transferred or coordinated, as if somehow that corrupts the candidate to have him or her identified with the very party they represent. We ought to be working towards those kinds of changes that will allow a greater responsibility on the party and the candidates to express their positions and to hold to their positions, be responsible for their positions. But no, we talk about these ways of how we're going to somehow reduce the impact of money in campaigns. It hasn't worked under this system. It hasn't worked. In addition to presidential primaries and general elections, if there's anything the American taxpayer should not be subsidizing, I would say, as much as I enjoy them, the week-long presidential conventions. On our side of the aisle, in our party, I think we've had some indications of what I consider to be wasteful spending in preparation for our upcoming convention. And to say to the taxpayer that in light of that, we ought to continue to subsidize the production of our presidential conventions by the two major parties is very difficult to articulate and even to understand. They are, as I say, grand fun, wonderful occasions, week-long party gatherings that are, unfortunately, in this day and age, largely symbolic. One can't even argue something important is being decided because, unfortunately, they ceased to have real significance some time ago. And that was part of our effort to try and cleanse the system. Rather than having people selected by these delegates that come to these conventions, we should move more and more to the primary operation. And, of course, then earlier and earlier in the season, so that somehow it becomes a two-year event. Well, I guess we're already in that. Well, taxpayers would be shocked, if not outraged, to discover that they have been funding these extravagant photo ops. Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, since 1976, approximately $1.5 billion has been spent on publicly funding our presidential primaries, our presidential general elections, and our presidential party conventions. The American taxpayer has paid enough for this unwise experiment. I think it should be ended, and the balance of the presidential election campaign fund and the presidential primary matching payment account returned to the Treasury to be used for deficit reduction. I think we'd actually have the American people cheer us for that. According to the 2010 Congressional Budget Office estimate, the elimination of this program would save American taxpayers $617 million over the next 10 years. Now, some could say, well, that's your opinion, we have our opinion, why change things? Well, why don't we look to the opinion of the American people? Not a bad idea in this House. Simply put, this program does not have the support of the American people. Taxpayer support has declined precipitously over time. I remember years ago, I thought it was a good experiment. I thought it was a good idea. I checked off some of my taxes to go to this program. I was in hopes that it would actually prove to be a good change. I, like most Americans, though, who contributed to that in the past, have given up on the program. We don't believe it gave us what we thought it might. In 1980, for instance, the percentage of taxpayers participating through their tax form checkoff was 28.7%. It was so popular that in 1985 it was 23%. It proved so successful that in 1990 it was 19.5%. It really proved itself by the year 95, because then 12.9% of the American taxpayer decided they'd participate. In the year 2000, it dropped to 11.5%. In 2005, it was 9.1%. And according to the IRS data obtained from the FEC, the checkoff rate in 2010 was 7.3%. In other words, on a direct vote, a plebiscite taken by the taxpayers of America, 92.7% reject the notion. Now, where I come from, that's a landslide. I think even in Chicago it would be a landslide, even if you paid your taxes only once. Mr. Chairman, this candidate and convention subsidy is obviously unpopular. To paraphrase one former member of the Federal Election Commission, quote, any system of public financing must have popular support to succeed. Today's low taxpayer checkoff rates cast serious doubt on whether the public financing system has this support. When only 1 in 13 taxpayers are participating, it's very difficult to conclude that the public financing system has broad popular support. Mr. Chairman, as we promised in the Pledge to America, and as we've promised here on the floor during these initial weeks of the 112th Congress, and as we have verified by our Transparency Enhancing Rules package, our bipartisan votes to trim Congress's budget and end excessive congressional printing, by our determination to return discretionary spending to fiscal year 2008 levels or less, and now through this bill, the Republican majority is committed to fiscal stewardship, to having a relentless eye on waste and inefficiency, and have continued commitment through this 112th Congress to reduce spending, to create private sector jobs, and produce meaningful legislation that makes long-lasting reforms. Mr. Chairman, if we in fact mean what we say when we say we are willing to look at those programs that already exist and to judge whether or not they have proven to be efficacious or efficient or successful in promoting the principles that underlaid their passage in the first place, we ought to start with this. This is a program that almost 93% of the American people who pay taxes reject. And we're asking them to participate. Maybe we ought to listen to what they are saying and instead allow the savings garnered by this particular bill to go towards deficit reduction. This bill, introduced by our colleague from Oklahoma, should garner overwhelming bipartisan support. We should thank him for introducing it, and I do, and for his commitment to a more responsible and efficient stewardship of taxpayer dollars. I would urge my colleagues to understand what this bill is and understand what it is not, and support H.R. 359. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. Before recognizing the gentleman from Pennsylvania, it was the Chair's understanding that perhaps the gentleman from Washington would like to consume some of the Ways and Means time and then ask permission to give the rest of his time to the gentleman from Pennsylvania. If that understanding is correct, the Chair would recognize the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield to the gentleman, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, or the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, for which time as he may wish to use in answering Mr. Lundgren.
Well, the gentleman has his own time. Do you want him to use yours? Yeah. Right, which one do you want to do? Do you want him to use your time or your time? Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized on his own time.
Thank you. It's my pleasure now to yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from California, distinguished member of the Committee on House Administration, Ms. Lupgren.
Gentlelady from California for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to H.R. 359. This bill will unnecessarily eliminate the voluntary $3 checkoff box. It's voluntary on tax returns to fund presidential elections and could increase the influence of special interests in the funding of presidential campaigns. Now, the bill has been fast-tracked by the Republican leadership without any hearings, no markups, no respect for the committee process. As a member of the House Administration Committee and a former chair of the Subcommittee on Elections, I'm very concerned by the end run around our committee and the lack of deference shown to the committee and its members. Speaker Boehner promised 2 weeks ago, when he took the Speaker's gavel, more transparency in the legislative process and to focus on job creation. Last week, the new majority fast-tracked the health care reform repeal bill. This week, they expedite the repeal of this voluntary program without the proper process. So I think the Speaker may need to revisit his statement about process and transparency. In addition to the process concerns, I question the need for Congress to pass this bill at all. I was here as a young staffer when the Judiciary Committee took up the impeachment of President Nixon. And it's worth remembering that the public finance system was created as a direct result of the Watergate scandal. Remember Phillips Petroleum, that illegally contributed $498,000 to the Nixon campaign, or Ruth Farkas, who told the Watergate grand jury that she gave $300,000 to the Nixon campaign as an explicit exchange for an ambassadorship to Luxembourg, or the tapes, the Nixon tapes, that revealed Secretary John Connally shook down dairy farmers for $600,000 in contribution in exchange for raising milk price supports to the detriment of children who needed milk around the country. These incidents eroded public confidence not only in the Nixon administration, but in the entire system. And in response, pursuant to the General Welfare Clause of the U.S. Constitution, Congress passed sweeping election reforms, including the presidential checkoff system. Now, I would not argue that this system is perfect at this time. I think it does need reform. But I think mere elimination without a committee process is a huge mistake. I would hope that the committee could convene, that we could sort through what are the problems with this current system, how do we fix them, work in a bipartisan way to create the fixes, and then come to this House for the solution. I yield back.
I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Oklahoma, the author of the bill, Mr. Cole.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. As I listen to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I would just urge them to read the bill. It's only 3 pages long. And frankly, most of the things I've heard so far don't have anything to do with this legislation. This legislation doesn't raise the legal contribution limit for anybody. This legislation doesn't allow corporate contributions. This legislation keeps in place all the disclosure requirements to presidential campaigns that we currently have. So those of you that are concerned about those things don't need to be concerned about this bill. H.R. 359 is really a very simple piece of legislation. It does 2 things. It removes taxpayer funding for presidential campaigns, and it eliminates taxpayer funding for political party conventions by the 2 major parties. Now, I have to say, if you look at whether or not these ideas have been popular, historically they frankly haven't. When this was put in the 1970s, the idea was that it would spread. It hasn't. We don't fund any of our elections with taxpayer dollars. Our colleagues on the other in the other body with taxpayer dollars. And frankly, as my friend Mr. Lundgren pointed out, popular participation in this program has declined for almost 30 consecutive years, from a high of 28% in 1980 to barely 7% today. So there's not much indication that it's popular. I need to say for the record, I philosophically have always been opposed to taxpayer dollars being used for political advocacy of any kind. Some of my friends on the other side have a very different point of view, and I respect that. We just have a philosophical difference. I think this is an inappropriate use of public money. Having said that, as I think even my friends on the other side at least tacitly acknowledge, this is a program that is broken beyond belief. And the current system didn't just begin to break down in 2008. I'd go back to 2000. President Bush didn't use this system during the primary campaign. He only used it, the public system, during the general election. 4 years later, neither President Bush nor Senator Kerry chose to use this system in the primary portion of the campaign. Fast forward another 4 years to 2008, neither President Obama nor now Secretary Clinton chose to use this in the primary campaign, and the President, having committed to use it in the general, then chose not to use it in the general, certainly his right, but said at the time he still thought it was a great idea and that someday we ought to go back and fix it. Now, I'll say this for the President. Having said that, we haven't seen any action on that front. He's been in office for 2 years. There's not been a proposal from the White House to fix this system. In fact, as my friends on the other side of the aisle know, currently he's planning to run for re-election. He's setting up a campaign. There's been a lot of thought on how to raise the money and how to put together a campaign, but no proposal from the administration to actually fix the system that they purport to support and that they said years ago they were going to try and fix. That's not true, by the way, of every member on the other side. There have been some that have, I think, genuinely tried to fix things, but let's recognize this system's been in decline and decay for a long time. Now, the estimates are we could save $612 million over a 10-year period. We all know in this chamber we have a $1.4 trillion deficit problem. Governing is choosing and prioritizing. This is $612 million that doesn't feed a single American, doesn't educate a single American, doesn't build a single mile of interstate highway or infrastructure, doesn't pay to defend the country. It simply goes to support a handful of politicians that want to run for president, many of whom are marginal. Asked additional.
I yield the gentleman an additional minute.
And so in an era when we have to make genuinely hard decisions, to me this is a no-brainer. This is a lot less important than a lot of the things that we need to consider and a lot of the decisions we'll have to make. There's leadership by lip service and there's leadership by example. If my friends on the other side think this is the appropriate thing, and certainly if the President thinks this, he ought to lead by example and participate in this system. If not, we ought to recognize it's broken, end it, save the money, and if somebody wants to rewrite a bill, then they ought to do that, and let's introduce it and have that debate. But right now, this is a bill money we can't afford to waste. This is a system that's broken. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 359. Let's get rid of this outdated system. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington, Mr. McDermott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The short title of this bill ought to be the white flag of the United States Congress on campaign finance. My distinguished colleague from Oklahoma says, if it's broke, why don't we write a bill? That's exactly what the point is. That's why I ask unanimous consent to add into the record a letter from the White House opposing the repeal of this bill.
The gentleman's request is covered by general leave granted in the House.
There aren't very many people on this floor who were involved in politics when this whole thing blew up. You've forgotten 1972. We wrote a bill in the Congress. We didn't, but the Congress wrote a bill. Interestingly enough, they left themselves out of it. But they tried to control how much money went into a presidential campaign. Now, if you don't index it for inflation or do some kind of mechanism, it's pretty clear that a law written with the limits of 1972 are going to be pretty out of date by 2012. So there are some things we could do to change this process and make it more in sync with what's going on in the society financially. But by saying you repeal it with nothing to replace it, you simply are saying we don't care how much money is spent in the election of the President of the United States. It is of no concern to the Republican Party whatsoever. It fits very nicely with the United Citizens lawsuit that allows corporate money to come in a variety of other ways, and the system is now so corrupt that what you heard my colleague from California say, that is, all the things that were uncovered as a result of Watergate and the investigation that followed and led to the ejection of the President from the White House was because we didn't have any controls on anything. Now, did we put the perfect controls on? No. Should we be amending this bill? Yes. Because I don't know what 2012 is going to cost. Maybe $1 billion on either side. Sarah Palin will have $1 billion, and Barack Obama will have $1 billion, and that'll be all right with everybody. But the problem with that is that the ordinary folks in this country don't have any opportunity to participate, and they also know that people don't give $1 billion with no expectation of something coming back. That's what happened in '72. People gave money, and they expected something back. And that's where the real fallacy here is, in simply wiping this out without trying to fix it. It's an admission that you do not care how much money gets spent in a presidential campaign. And if that's your view of how the democracy works, I think we are in serious trouble. I'm one of those who think there should be publicly financed campaigns. I think even my opponents against me, I get 84%, but I think my opponent ought to have an equal shot at me. But the Congress didn't put that in this bill because they didn't want that. Neither did the Senate want that. They wanted to put it on the President and say, well, we fixed it over there. We really need it for this House and the Senate, as well as what's going on in the presidential election. And to simply repeal this is bad public policy. It is an admission that we don't care. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent, and I oppose the bill. I guess you get that. Mr. Speaker,
I figured that out.
I ask unanimous consent that the remainder of my time be controlled by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Brady.
Without objection. How much time did you use? 4.5. The chair would advise that there's now a single manager on the